In the world, there are 7 different continents, 195 different countries, and thousands of different cultures. So, if you're trying to get outside of your comfort zone, you can do so nearly anywhere, even if it's just a few hours outside of your hometown. But if you're trying to really get outside of your comfort zone, one country that has a very different cultural mindset than the United States is Brazil. Brazil is commonly referred to as the land of contrast and has over 3 million square miles of land and over 200 million people in its population. Because Brazil is so large, there are many different cultures and areas that differ from one another, which really makes Brazil a country that is deserving of the nickname the land of contrast. Although there are many different cultures within the country, Brazil's history has greatly impacted each of them. Before Europeans came to South America, indigenous people had inhabited the area for nearly 10,000 years. And when European settlers came and found Brazil and this area, they brought with them a lot of different deadly diseases that completely decimated the indigenous population. Those Indians that did survive, unfortunately, were enslaved and severely mistreated by the Portuguese and other European colonists. And by the year 1700 and throughout that century, the natural resources of gold, diamonds, and the fertile grounds of coffee plantations had been found and made the population of European settlers and African and indigenous slaves exponentially increase. Up until about 1789, the area of Brazil was controlled by the Portuguese, but then the first rebellion against the Portuguese happened, and soon after the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars greatly influenced the people of Brazil to fight back and led to Dom Pedro declaring Brazil's independence from Portugal, founding the Empire of Brazil. The formal recognition of independence came a little bit later in 1825 when the treaty was finally signed by both parties. But throughout the Empire of Brazil, the backlands and Amazon basin area of Brazil were gaining more and more people from migration, although the cities by the coast were still being the most populated. And soon, Rio de Janeiro's population had passed 500,000 by the time that slaves were fully emancipated in 1888. The overthrow of the monarchy of the Empire of Brazil in 1889, as well as the emancipation of slaves, initiated major changes in Brazil, which included social, economic, and political improvements. Because of the Portuguese settlers and the African and indigenous slaves, modern way of Brazilian life is largely influenced by those 3 cultures. The language of the Indians, Tupi-Guarani, strongly influences the Brazilian Portuguese language and other cultural influences that are mostly apparent in the Amazon basin. Although the religious beliefs are greatly influenced by the Portuguese settlers because Brazil is predominantly Christian and nearly 2/3 of the population adhere to Roman Catholicism. In fact, religion is a very important aspect of their culture that they built a 125-foot statue of Christ the Redeemer that stands over Rio de Janeiro as a great reminder. Family is also a very important aspect of Brazilian culture, and many families, not just the mom and dad and kids, but grandparents, aunts, uncles, extended family will live in very close proximity to one another, if not under the same roof, because there is a big expectation to be loyal and committed to your family in Brazil. Along with being committed to family, people are also really important to people in the Brazilian culture, which influences the way that they spend their time. If you look in chapter 5 of the textbook, Communication in Everyday Life, that we're reading in this class, there is a section that defines monochronic and polychronic culture. Monochronic culture is a culture that views time as a valuable commodity and is very punctual and puts a lot of emphasis on being on time. So that's the way that America is, in that usually if you're 5 minutes late to a meeting, that's considered very rude. While Brazil is a polychronic culture, they have a much more laid-back attitude towards time, and they see it as complex, that has a lot of different strands, that one is not more important than another. So that makes it so that their relationships with people are a lot more important than time and money. So In Brazil, you do business with people instead of companies. So if a business meeting goes over 3 hours, it's usually not a big deal, along with if the meeting had started 20 minutes late. Another thing that happens in Brazil is that group work, such as in business meetings, happens together. It's not how we usually do it, as you take this task, I'll take this task, and then put it together to save time. They usually do group work together. They take one task and do it all together, move on to the next task, do it all together. So they're a lot more unified in that way. Another thing that's very important in Brazilian culture is etiquette, although their etiquette might seem a lot different than ours in the United States. They're a lot closer to people and a lot more touchy-feely. So in the United States, usually a handshake or even not touching each other is very appropriate when meeting someone for the first time, while in Brazil, they would often a nice kiss on the cheek or even a hug is a lot more appropriate, and they're a lot more compassionate towards people. They're also a lot more expressive and emotional when communicating with another. Hand gestures, big emotions, and speaking their mind are all very common. But although they do have big expressive communication, they also don't really want a lot of conflicts. So avoiding things such as political arguments and other things that are kind of iffy subjects are usually avoided. And although they are very expressive in their communication, they're also very, very expressive and emotional when doing festivities in their culture, such as one of their most known cultural aspects, which is the carnival. So the carnival is a celebration that is about 46 days before Easter, and it's characterized by tons of bright, beautiful, and huge music festivals, parades, dances. The people of Brazil fill the streets for days on end and just have celebrations day and night, parades, and huge costumes, traditional dances, and food. And it really unifies the country with samba and a lot of different other traditional dances. Along with celebrating carnival and their traditions, culturally, sports such as football or soccer, as we know it here in the United States, are a very big aspect of the culture, as they've dominated the World Cup for the last several years. But today, instead of being celebratory in their culture and way of life, such as the carnival, Brazil is actually being hit very hard by the global pandemic of COVID-19, as well as the rest of the world, except for that the United States and Brazil account for nearly 40% of all coronavirus cases, which is kind of crazy. And it has greatly impacted their way of life, such as they kind of had to be less compassionate with one another, kind of skipping out on those kisses on the side of the cheek. Although they are missing out on that, I think that the United States has a lot to learn from the compassion towards other people in the unifying factor of being more compassionate and expressive about their time and relationships with others. In the United States, our country is kind of divided right now, especially with all the social justice issues going on. And I think that if we started to become more of a polychronic culture, such as Brazil, we would be able to relate more to other people and their side of views. And I think we just really should try and take an example after Brazil of being more open with one another and saying how we think and feel, and being more accepting of how others feel, and valuing relationships and people over time and money, such as Brazil does. And I think that it could really just help us respect each other and love each other more within our own culture. And also, I got a lot of this information from Britannica, as well as the Atlas Corpus, or Corpse, and another website called Cultural Atlas, as well as from our book and a website called The Guardian, and I will link those down below for you to check out. Thank you.